The air in Paris on that fateful summer day in 1998 crackled with an almost tangible electricity. All eyes of the world, it seemed, converged upon the Stade de France, a modern coliseum poised to host the grandest spectacle in football, the World Cup final. France, the host nation, stood ready to face Brazil, the undisputed titans of the sport, five-time champions and perennial favorites. This was more than just a match. It was a global event, a clash of titans, a narrative woven into the very fabric of sporting history. The anticipation was a living, breathing entity, a collective breath held by billions across continents. At the epicenter of this maelstrom of expectation was Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima, universally known as O Fenomeno. Just 21 years old, yet already a legend, his name was synonymous with breathtaking skill, explosive speed, and an uncanny ability to score from seemingly impossible angles. He was the golden boy, the charismatic superstar, the heir apparent to Pelé's throne, expected to single-handedly lead Brazil to their fifth World Cup triumph. His image adorned billboards across Paris. His face beamed from television screens worldwide, a testament to his unparalleled celebrity and the immense commercial power he wielded. But beneath the glittering facade of global superstardom and the roar of the expectant crowd, a darker, more insidious force was at play. This was not merely a tale of athletic prowess. It was an investigative journey into the shadows where corporate greed and the relentless pursuit of profit collided spectacularly with the fragile well-being of a young man. The stakes were astronomical, not just for national pride and sporting glory, but for multi-million-dollar empires built on endorsements and sponsorships. Brands like Nike, whose iconic swoosh was inextricably linked to Ronaldo's every move, stood to gain or lose fortunes based on his performance, on Brazil's victory. The pressure on Ronaldo was not just from his nation, but from an entire financial ecosystem that revolved around him. A subtle, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the meticulously planned machinery of the event. A quiet unease, a premonition that something was deeply, fundamentally amiss, began to settle over those closest to the Brazilian camp. It was the calm before an unimaginable storm, a silent prologue to a disaster that would shake the football world to its core and leave an indelible mark on the psyche of a generation. Ronaldo, in the quiet solitude of his hotel room, a sanctuary momentarily removed from the deafening roar of the outside world, attempted to adhere to his pre-match rituals. The routine was sacred: a light meal, a massage, a period of quiet reflection, a final check of his boots. Yet, even in this familiar pattern, a subtle tension gnawed at him. The weight of an entire nation rested squarely upon his young shoulders, a burden that would crush lesser men. Every touch of the ball in training, every media appearance, every expectation heaped upon him by fans and pundits alike, magnified the already colossal pressure. He felt it, a heavy cloak draped over him, suffocating, yet strangely exhilarating. It was the price of being O Fenomeno. His mind, usually sharp and focused, drifted intermittently. A fleeting sensation, a flicker of something unsettling, passed through him like a cold draft. He attributed it to pre-match nerves, the natural anxiety that preceded any major final. He pushed it aside, attempting to recenter himself, to visualize the game, the goals, the victory. He closed his eyes, picturing the emerald green pitch, the white lines, the roar of the crowd as he celebrated. Yet, the image seemed to waver, distorted by an unidentifiable shimmer at its edges. It was nothing concrete, merely a vague whisper of unease, easily dismissed as the overactive imagination of a young man facing the biggest moment of his life. The final moments before the team announcements were always the most intense, a crucible of anticipation. The coaches delivered their last-minute instructions. The players exchanged glances, a mixture of determination and trepidation etched on their faces. The air in the locker room was thick with the scent of liniment and sweat, adrenaline and dreams. Ronaldo, sitting amongst his teammates, tried to project an aura of calm, a mask he had perfected over years of living under the spotlight. But inside, that small, unsettling whisper grew a little louder, a discordant note in the symphony of his impending glory. The world held its breath, unaware that the stage was set not just for a football match, but for a corporate drama of unprecedented proportions, a stark illustration of how far the pursuit of profit could push the boundaries of human ethics. The countdown to kickoff had begun, and with it, the countdown to a mystery that would haunt football for decades. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The quiet solitude of Ronaldo's hotel room, meant to be a sanctuary, abruptly shattered. Hours before the final whistle, in the hushed afternoon preceding the monumental clash, a terrifying drama unfolded. The luxurious surroundings of the Brazilian team's Parisian hotel, usually a hive of controlled excitement, became a scene of sudden, desperate chaos. Roberto Carlos, Ronaldo's roommate and close friend, entered their shared space, perhaps to share a joke, or simply to check on the star striker. What he discovered instead froze the blood in his veins. Ronaldo lay on the floor, his body contorting violently, eyes rolled back, a guttural sound escaping his throat. It was a convulsion, raw and terrifying, a sudden, brutal assault on his seemingly invincible form. The sight was horrifying. The powerful athlete, a picture of grace and strength on the pitch, reduced to a helpless, struggling figure. Roberto Carlos's initial shock quickly morphed into a desperate cry for help, his voice echoing through the opulent hotel corridor, piercing the carefully maintained calm. Panic, swift and merciless, erupted. The serene atmosphere of the team hotel dissolved into a flurry of frantic activity. Coaches, medical staff, and other players rushed into the room, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, confusion, and profound helplessness. The air crackled with unspoken questions, each more terrifying than the last. What was happening to their phenomenon? Was this the end of his World Cup dream? Of his career? Of something far more fundamental? Everyone moved with a desperate urgency, their professional training battling against the sheer, visceral terror of the moment. The initial reactions were a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. No one could fathom how the epitome of athletic perfection could be so suddenly, so brutally, afflicted. The team doctor, a man accustomed to diagnosing sprains and strains, suddenly found himself facing a medical emergency of unprecedented scale and mystery. His hurried assessment was a blur of professional detachment fighting against personal alarm. He barked orders, his voice strained, as others moved to assist Ronaldo, trying to ensure he wouldn't injure himself further during the violent seizures. There was no clear diagnosis, only a terrifying uncertainty. Was it epilepsy? A stroke? A reaction to something? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered and terrifying. The immediate priority was to stabilize him, to ensure his airways were clear, to protect him from the uncontrolled movements of his own body. Amidst the swirling panic, a decision was made with desperate speed and an eye towards absolute secrecy. Ronaldo had to be moved, and quickly. The official narrative, the carefully constructed image of Brazilian dominance, and Ronaldo's invincibility could not afford this kind of public exposure. He was rushed to a nearby clinic, not in an ambulance with blaring sirens, but discreetly, under the cloak of utmost secrecy. The intention was clear: to conduct tests, to understand what had just transpired, and to contain the news before it could explode across the global media landscape. The cover-up, subtle at first, began almost immediately. Orders were whispered, instructions passed down with hushed urgency. The official line, if anyone were to ask, was that Ronaldo was merely undergoing routine checks, perhaps feeling a slight fatigue. The truth, the shocking reality of his convulsion, was to be buried deep, shielded from the prying eyes of the world's press. The Brazilian Football Confederation officials, their faces pale with worry, moved with calculated precision, orchestrating a ballet of deception. They understood the monumental stakes involved, not just for the team, but for the entire infrastructure of sponsors and commercial interests tied to Ronaldo's image. Desperate attempts were made to keep Ronaldo's condition from leaking to the media. Phones rang incessantly, but official channels remained tight-lipped, offering only vague reassurances. Security around the hotel and the clinic was discreetly but significantly tightened. Every member of the team and staff was implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, reminded of the need for absolute discretion. The world outside, buzzing with anticipation for the final, remained blissfully unaware of the terrifying scene that had just unfolded. They did not know that their hero, their phenomeno, had just battled something far more formidable than any opposing defender. A battle waged in the terrifying confines of his own body. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere was one of hushed tension and frantic activity. Medical specialists were summoned, their expertise brought to bear on the baffling case. Ronaldo, after the initial terrifying episode, had regained consciousness, but he was visibly shaken, confused, and weak. He lay on a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, a stark contrast to the vibrant, energetic figure the world knew. The tests began, a battery of examinations designed to pinpoint the cause of the convulsion. Blood samples were taken, brain scans performed, every possible avenue explored. The team doctor, his brow furrowed with concern, consulted with the clinic specialists, their voices low, their expressions grim. The uncertainty was palpable, a heavy shroud hanging over the sterile environment. The immediate medical response had been chaotic, driven by raw fear. Now, a semblance of clinical order was being restored, but the underlying desperation remained. The weight of the world, it seemed, was not just on Ronaldo's shoulders, but on the shoulders of every person in that clinic, every official in the CBF, every individual who understood the catastrophic implications of his condition. The mystery deepened with every inconclusive test, every conflicting opinion. The clock was ticking, the World Cup final looming ever closer, and the greatest player on the planet was lying in a hospital bed, his future and Brazil's hopes hanging precariously in the balance. The world waited for Ronaldo, but few understood the silent, desperate battle being fought behind closed doors, a battle to save not just a game, but a young man and a carefully constructed illusion. The frantic scene at the clinic continued, a whirlwind of medical professionals, hushed conversations, and the relentless hum of diagnostic machinery. Ronaldo, though conscious and increasingly aware of his surroundings, remained disoriented. His eyes, usually sparkling with life, held a vacant, far-away quality, reflecting a profound sense of bewilderment and fear. The initial battery of tests yielded no definitive answers, only more questions. The doctors, a mix of the Brazilian team physician and the clinic's own neurologists, huddled together, their voices low, their expressions a mixture of professional detachment and growing concern. They discussed possibilities, An epileptic seizure? A vasovagal syncope triggered by extreme stress? Or perhaps something more insidious? A reaction to medication, an underlying condition previously undiagnosed. The conflicting opinions created an unsettling echo in the sterile corridors. Just as a fragile sense of medical stability began to settle, another, far more insidious pressure began to assert itself. The clinic doors, guarded by discreet but firm security, could not keep out the relentless force of corporate interest. Nike, the behemoth sportswear company whose entire World Cup marketing campaign was inextricably linked to Ronaldo's luminous image, began to make its presence felt. Phone calls, initially polite inquiries, quickly escalated into urgent demands. Representatives, slick and impeccably dressed, arrived at the clinic, their faces betraying not concern for Ronaldo's health, but a chilling anxiety over the bottom line. The financial implications of Ronaldo not playing were staggering, a multi-million-dollar crisis unfolding in real time. Nike had invested heavily, banking on Ronaldo's undeniable star power to propel their brand to unprecedented heights during the global spectacle. His absence from the final would not just be a sporting disappointment, it would be a catastrophic commercial failure, a public relations nightmare on a global scale. The corporate sponsors, through their representatives, applied immense pressure, subtly at first, then with increasing directness. They spoke of contractual obligations, of global audiences, of the irreparable damage to brand image. Their arguments were cold, calculated, devoid of any genuine human empathy. This corporate pressure created an immediate, almost unbearable tension between the medical staff and the business interests. The team doctor, whose primary allegiance was to the health and well-being of his player, found himself in an impossible ethical dilemma. His medical judgment, rooted in the Hippocratic Oath, clashed violently with the relentless demands for Ronaldo's participation. He voiced his concerns, articulating the risks, the potential for further seizures, the unknown long-term effects. The neurologists at the clinic echoed his warnings, advocating for caution, for rest, for further investigation. But their medical expertise was being systematically undermined by the sheer weight of commercial power. The internal debate within the Brazilian Football Confederation became a cauldron of conflicting loyalties and desperate calculations. Officials, already reeling from the shock of Ronaldo's convulsion, were now caught between the medical advice and the corporate juggernaut. Their faces were etched with a peculiar blend of fear and exasperation. They understood the medical risks, but they also understood the power of Nike, the vast sums of money involved, the intricate web of sponsorships that held the entire enterprise together. The CBF president found himself in a high-stakes poker game, where the chips were not just money, but the health of his star player and the reputation of his nation. Zagallo, the Brazilian coach, a seasoned veteran of countless battles, found himself utterly caught in the middle of this unprecedented power struggle. His grizzled face showed the strain of a man torn between his paternal instincts for his player and the crushing expectations of a nation, amplified by corporate demands. He had seen Ronaldo's convulsion, witnessed the raw terror of it. His heart urged him to protect his young star, to prioritize his health above all else. But the voices from the CBF, from the Nike representatives, were loud, insistent, almost hypnotic in their relentless repetition of "Ronaldo must play." He felt the weight of history, the hopes of millions, and the cold, hard logic of profit pressing down on him. The moral dilemma was stark: corporate greed versus athlete well-being. Then came the crucial phone call, or perhaps a series of meetings, whispered behind closed doors, away from the prying ears of the medical professionals. The details of these conversations remain shrouded in secrecy, but their outcome was devastatingly clear. The pressure from Nike, perhaps coupled with the CBF's own fear of financial repercussions and public outcry, proved irresistible. The decision was made. Against the explicit medical advice, against the instincts of many, Ronaldo would play. The team doctor, his face pale and drawn, was tasked with delivering the news. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, a violation of his professional ethics. Ronaldo, though still weak, was informed that he would be leaving the clinic, that he would be rejoining the squad. A sense of weary resignation settled over him. He was a player, a phenomenon, but in that moment he was also a pawn, his body and his future subject to forces far beyond his control. The clinic, which had briefly offered a sanctuary of medical logic, now felt like a holding cell, from which he was being released not into recovery, but into the maw of a global spectacle. The world still awaited its hero, unaware that the decision had been made not by medical experts, but by the relentless, unyielding demands of commerce. The stage was set for a tragedy, disguised as a triumph. Ronaldo's return to the stadium was not a triumphant procession, but a spectral emergence. He moved with the slow, deliberate steps of a man waking from a deep, troubled sleep, his eyes devoid of their usual fierce intensity, replaced instead by a haunting blankness. He was a ghost of his former self, a celebrated athlete reduced to a walking shell, navigating the bustling corridors of Stade de France as if through a fog. The team, already grappling with the emotional whiplash of his earlier collapse and subsequent miraculous return, watched him with a mixture of profound relief and an even deeper, unspoken concern. They saw not, O Fenomeno, their electrifying leader, but a fragile, vulnerable figure, visibly shaken by an ordeal they could only begin to comprehend. During the pre-match warm-up, the stark reality of his condition became painfully evident. Ronaldo's movements were sluggish, his usually fluid grace replaced by a heavy, almost robotic motion. His legendary bursts of speed were absent, his intricate footwork hesitant. He kicked the ball without conviction, his shots lacking their characteristic power and precision. His gaze, distant and unfocused, seemed to pierce through the vibrant spectacle around him, seeing something indefinable, perhaps reliving the terrifying moments in his hotel room or the cold, clinical glare of the hospital lights. The other players, typically energetic and boisterous in their pre-game rituals, found themselves subdued, their usual camaraderie replaced by an anxious quiet. They exchanged worried glances, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the humid Parisian air. How could their star, their talisman, perform under such an immense psychological and physical toll? The media, initially confused by the sudden, unexplained change in the team sheet, Ronaldo's name had been absent, then mysteriously reinstated, watched his warm-up with growing unease. Their cameras zoomed in on his face, searching for the familiar fire, but found only an unsettling pallor. The commentators, usually brimming with enthusiastic predictions, struggled to articulate the strange atmosphere surrounding the Brazilian squad. There were whispers, fragmented observations about his unusual demeanor, but no one dared to voice the full extent of their apprehension. The official line, carefully disseminated by the Brazilian Football Confederation, spoke only of a minor discomfort, a precautionary checkup, painting a picture of mundane pre-game jitters, a stark contrast to the terrifying truth. For Ronaldo himself, the psychological toll was immense, a crushing weight that pressed down on his young shoulders. The fear of another convulsion, the confusion of what had transpired, the lingering disorientation, all swirled within his mind, creating a vortex of anxiety. He walked onto the pitch, the roar of the crowd a deafening wave that threatened to overwhelm him, his body moving on instinct, his mind a battlefield of fragmented thoughts and raw terror. The world watched, a global audience of billions, unaware of the drama, the ethical compromises, the corporate machinations that had propelled this young man onto the grandest stage, a reluctant participant in his own unfolding tragedy. His performance in the match was a stark, agonizing contrast to his usual brilliance. From the opening whistle, it was clear this was not the Ronaldo o fenomeno the world knew and adored. He drifted across the field, his runs lacking conviction, his passes often misplaced. The explosive acceleration that left defenders trailing in his wake was conspicuously absent. His touch, usually exquisite, seemed heavy, betraying a lack of sharpness, a disconnect between mind and body. He was present in body, but his spirit, his ferocious, competitive fire, seemed to have been extinguished, replaced by a profound weariness. He moved like a puppet on strings, pulled by unseen forces, rather than the master of his own destiny. The growing unease among commentators and fans intensified with every sluggish step, every missed opportunity. The collective consciousness of the stadium shifted from anticipation to bewilderment, then to a creeping sense of dread. Brazilian supporters, usually vocal and vibrant, became increasingly quiet, their cheers replaced by gasps of disbelief and frustrated sighs. French fans, initially wary of the legendary striker, found themselves watching a shadow, a phantom of his former self. The stark contrast between the expected phenomenon and the reality unfolding before their eyes was palpable, a disquieting spectacle that left everyone questioning, though few could articulate what they truly felt. The match unfolded, a slow, painful unraveling for Brazil. Zidane, the French maestro, capitalized on Brazil's disarray, his two headers sealing their fate. The entire Brazilian team's performance was affected, not just Ronaldo's. The shock, the fear, the unresolved trauma of their teammates' earlier collapse weighed heavily on their collective psyche. They played with a palpable anxiety, a distraction that permeated their every move. The usual samba rhythm of their play was gone, replaced by a disjointed, hesitant effort. The dream of a fifth World Cup title, so vivid just hours before, began to recede, fading into the Parisian night. The final whistle blew, sealing a crushing 3-0 defeat for Brazil, a defeat that felt less like a sporting loss and more like the inevitable conclusion to a dark, unsettling drama. Ronaldo walked off the pitch, his head bowed, his face a mask of profound emptiness, the zombie in Paris, having played his part in a tragedy whose true depths would only begin to surface in the years to come. The immediate post-match reactions were a cacophony of contrasting emotions, a stark division between the ecstatic triumph of France and the profound devastation that enveloped the Brazilian camp. French supporters erupted in a joyous frenzy, their national pride soaring with every cheer. Every flag waved. For Brazil, however, the silence was deafening, a heavy blanket of grief and disbelief settling over their once vibrant fan base. Inside the locker room, the despair was almost suffocating. Players slumped on benches, tears streaming down faces that, just hours before, had been alight with hope. Amidst this raw anguish, Ronaldo sat, an almost spectral figure. His demeanor was quiet, eerily so, a profound absence in his eyes that spoke volumes of a spirit utterly drained. He was not overtly weeping, nor did he display anger. Instead, a haunting emptiness seemed to consume him, as if the very essence of his being had been siphoned away by the day's traumatic events. He moved with a detached resignation, a man utterly spent, his personal ordeal eclipsing even the collective sorrow of the defeat. As the world grappled with the unexpected outcome, questions immediately began to surface in the press. The abrupt change in the team sheet, Ronaldo's clearly subdued performance, and the general air of confusion surrounding the Brazilian squad fueled intense speculation. Initial rumors, whispered in hushed tones in the press boxes, slowly began to coalesce into more pointed inquiries. Why had Ronaldo been initially omitted, then reinstated? What was the nature of his minor discomfort? The official narrative, hastily constructed and disseminated by the Brazilian Football Confederation, attempted to quell the rising tide of curiosity. They attributed Ronaldo's condition to stress, a common enough affliction for a player of his stature facing such immense pressure. This explanation, however, felt flimsy, an inadequate bandage over a gaping wound, failing to convincingly address the palpable oddity of the day's events. The medical reports, when they eventually surfaced, were suspiciously vague, almost deliberately obscured. Details were scarce, terminology generic, and any specific diagnostic information conspicuously absent. Some reports even seemed contradictory, creating more confusion than clarity. The inconsistencies only served to deepen the mystery, feeding the nascent suspicion that something far more serious had transpired behind the scenes. Those within the inner circle of the Brazilian team, the players and staff who had witnessed the terrifying convulsion, found themselves caught in a difficult bind. Their comments to the media were guarded, laced with a subtle tension that betrayed their true feelings. They spoke of team unity and collective responsibility, but beneath the surface of their carefully chosen words, hints of something deeper, something profoundly unsettling, lingered. A player might mention Ronaldo not being himself, another might allude to difficult circumstances, but none dared to break the unspoken code of silence, perhaps out of loyalty or perhaps out of fear. The role of corporate sponsors, particularly Nike, in shaping this carefully curated narrative was undeniable. Their immense financial stake in Ronaldo, arguably the world's most marketable athlete, meant that any public perception of weakness or vulnerability had to be rigorously controlled. The idea of their star player suffering a severe medical episode, potentially sidelining him or even ending his career, was an existential threat to their multi-million-dollar investments. Thus, their influence was subtle yet pervasive, subtly guiding the CBF's public statements, ensuring that the official story remained one of minor, manageable stress, rather than a harrowing medical crisis. The public, bombarded with conflicting information and vague reassurances, found themselves in a state of growing confusion. This fertile ground of uncertainty quickly became the breeding ground for various conspiracy theories, each more elaborate than the last. Some whispered of poisoning, others of foul play, while many simply concluded that the truth was being deliberately withheld. The lingering sense of injustice hung heavy in the air, a silent accusation against the powerful forces that seemed to have prioritized profit over human well-being. Unanswered questions multiplied, echoing in the minds of fans and commentators alike. Why had the health of such a vital player been seemingly disregarded? Who truly made the final decision for him to play? The weight of the secret, the knowledge of the true events of that day, began to press heavily on those involved. The Brazilian Football Confederation officials, the team doctor, and even coach Zagallo, all carried the burden of their choices, their compromises. The silence they maintained, born of loyalty, pressure, or perhaps even fear, would prove to be a heavy cross to bear, one that would haunt them for years to come. The euphoria of France's victory slowly faded, leaving behind an unsettling residue of doubt and suspicion, a dark stain on the memory of what should have been a celebration of pure sport. The world moved on, but the mystery of the zombie in Paris continued to simmer beneath the surface, a testament to a day where the beautiful game had been marred by something far uglier than mere defeat. Years passed, but the haunting mystery of the 1998 World Cup final, the peculiar circumstances surrounding Ronaldo's performance, and Brazil's crushing defeat continued to echo in the collective memory of the football world. It was a wound that never quite healed, a persistent question mark hanging over one of the sport's most iconic events. The official narrative of stress had always felt hollow, a flimsy veil barely concealing a far more complex and troubling truth. As the immediate shock subsided and the emotional dust settled, the quiet whispers began to grow louder, evolving into persistent demands for clarity. Investigative journalists, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a commitment to uncovering the truth, refused to let the story die. They meticulously revisited old reports, cross-referenced timelines, and sought out individuals who had been present during those fateful days in Paris. Their work often felt like chipping away at a granite wall, slowly revealing the cracks beneath the polished surface. Former players, initially bound by a code of silence and team loyalty, slowly began to speak out, their testimonies often conflicting, yet each fragment adding another piece to the perplexing puzzle. Some recounted hushed conversations, others recalled the palpable fear in the team hotel, and a few even hinted at direct interference from powerful external forces. These new details, pieced together from various sources, painted an increasingly unsettling picture, one that diverged sharply from the sanitized version propagated by the Brazilian Football Confederation and its corporate sponsors. The pressure on the CBF and Nike, though initially sporadic, began to mount with increasing intensity. Every new interview, every re-examined document, every fresh angle brought renewed scrutiny. The public, too, had grown weary of the evasiveness, sensing a deliberate obfuscation of facts. The re-evaluation of the medical reports from that period became a focal point of this renewed investigation. What had once been accepted as vague or incomplete now appeared deliberately so, riddled with inconsistencies that begged for closer examination. Experts, reviewing the sparse data, pointed out glaring omissions and questionable interpretations, suggesting that the initial assessments might have been influenced by factors beyond pure medical judgment. The more they delved, the clearer it became that the health of a young man had been entangled in a web of commercial interests and sporting ambition. The human cost of the decision to let Ronaldo play, despite his terrifying convulsion, was profound and far-reaching. While he would later achieve incredible triumphs, his career was punctuated by a series of severe injuries and health issues that, in retrospect, seemed to cast a long shadow back to that fateful day in Paris. His long-term health concerns, both physical and psychological, became a silent testament to the ethical implications of corporate influence in sports. The betrayal felt by Ronaldo and his family, though often unvoiced publicly, was a deeply personal burden. To be used as a pawn in a high-stakes game, to have one's well-being compromised for the sake of profit, left an indelible mark. It highlighted a stark reality. In the cutthroat world of professional sports, the athlete, even one as iconic as Ronaldo, could sometimes be reduced to a commodity. The slow, painful process of uncovering the truth was akin to excavating a buried relic, each layer of dirt and obfuscation removed, revealing more of the complex, often ugly, reality beneath. It wasn't a sudden explosion of revelation, but a gradual, relentless chipping away at the edifice of official denial. Journalists worked tirelessly, driven by a conviction that justice, even if delayed, must eventually prevail. They sought out those on the periphery, individuals who might have seen or heard something, but whose voices had been silenced by fear or loyalty. Many refused to speak, their eyes still holding the ghost of that day. Others offered tantalizing but incomplete snippets, afraid to fully commit. Then, after years of silence, a crucial turning point arrived. A key individual, who had been intimately involved in the events leading up to the final, decided to break their silence. This person, whose identity remained protected for a time, had carried the weight of the secret for too long, the moral burden becoming unbearable. The guilt, perhaps compounded by witnessing Ronaldo's subsequent struggles, finally compelled them to step forward. Their testimony, delivered in hushed tones to a trusted journalist, was not just a collection of facts, it was a confession, a detailed account of the immense pressure exerted, the arguments behind closed doors, and the ultimate tragic compromise. This individual provided the crucial clue, the missing piece of the puzzle that would finally begin to unravel the entire sordid truth, setting the stage for a confrontation with those who had orchestrated the cover-up so meticulously. The long-held secret was about to be laid bare, exposing the raw nerve of corporate power and its devastating consequences. This was the beginning of the end for the official narrative, the moment when the zombie in Paris would finally begin to tell his silent story. The moment had arrived, a pivotal juncture where the accumulated weight of circumstantial evidence and whispered rumors coalesced into an undeniable truth. The former medical staff member, Dr. Almeida, his face etched with years of internal conflict, finally sat across from the investigative journalist, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a worn, leather-bound diary. His conscience, long tormented by the memory of that fateful day, had finally overpowered his fear of retribution. What followed was not just an interview, but a confession, a cathartic release of a burden he had carried in silent agony for over 2 decades. Dr. Almeida's voice, initially a hesitant murmur, grew stronger as he recounted the harrowing sequence of events, painting a vivid picture of the chaos and moral compromise that had unfolded behind the scenes. He described the frantic scene at the clinic, the initial diagnosis of a convulsive seizure, and the unanimous medical recommendation that Ronaldo should absolutely not play. His brain activity was erratic, Almeida explained, his eyes distant, reliving the moment. There were clear signs of neurological distress. Any responsible doctor would have ruled him out immediately, indefinitely. Then came the insidious pressure, subtle at first, then increasingly overt, orchestrated directly by the corporate sponsors. Dr. Almeida detailed the phone calls, the urgent meetings, the presence of grim-faced Nike executives who arrived at the clinic as if summoned by a silent alarm. They didn't explicitly threaten, he clarified, but their presence alone was a powerful, chilling statement. They spoke of brand reputation, contractual obligations, and the catastrophic financial implications of Ronaldo's absence. The numbers they casually tossed around were staggering, figures that dwarfed the concerns of a single athlete's health. It was clear that Ronaldo, o fenomeno, was not just a player, but a walking, breathing, multi-million-dollar asset, and his temporary incapacitation represented a monumental loss of revenue for the corporate giants. The turning point, Almeida recalled with a shudder, was a particularly intense meeting involving high-ranking CBF officials, Nike representatives, and a bewildered Zagallo, the national team coach. The team doctor, steadfast in his medical opinion, was slowly but surely sidelined, his professional integrity eroded by the relentless corporate machinery. They presented it as a team decision, a patriotic duty, Almeida confessed, his voice laced with bitterness. But it was never about the team. or patriotism. It was about the logos on the jerseys, the television rights, the billions tied to Ronaldo's image. He described how the Nike executives, with their polished demeanor and unwavering resolve, systematically dismantled every medical argument against Ronaldo playing, suggesting alternative explanations for his seizure: stress, anxiety, even a misdiagnosis. They even brought in their own medical consultants who, conveniently, offered more palatable, albeit medically dubious, assessments. The sequence of events leading to Ronaldo playing despite medical warnings was a masterclass in corporate manipulation. The official medical report was deliberately vague, omitting crucial details about the severity of the convulsion and the initial dire prognosis. The team doctor, under immense duress and fearing for his career, was coerced into signing off on a revised assessment, one that deemed Ronaldo fit to play. Almeida recounted how Zagallo, caught between the medical advice he trusted and the overwhelming corporate and national pressure, eventually capitulated, his spirit visibly broken. The decision was presented to the squad not as a medical miracle, but as a testament to Ronaldo's unwavering spirit and desire to play for his country. The raw truth, however, was far more sinister. Corporate greed had dictated a medical outcome. The emotional impact of this revelation, when it finally broke, was seismic. Ronaldo, who had lived with the public narrative of stress for so long, expressed a profound sense of anguish and betrayal. The details of the cover-up, the explicit pressure from Nike, and the deliberate obfuscation of his true condition reopened old wounds. He had always suspected nefarious forces at play, but to have it confirmed with such chilling clarity was a different burden altogether. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Demands for accountability echoed across social media and news channels. The revelation exposed the dark underbelly of professional sports, where the health and well-being of an athlete could be so casually sacrificed on the altar of profit. The irreversible damage to reputations was immense. The CBF faced unprecedented scrutiny, its credibility shattered. Nike, while issuing carefully worded statements of denial and deflection, found its image tarnished by the stark reality of its alleged actions. Trust, once a cornerstone of the athlete-sponsor relationship, was irrevocably broken. The confession laid bare the stark reality of how money had triumphed over human well-being, how the potential for billions in revenue had overridden fundamental ethical considerations. Dr. Almeida's brave act of coming forward had not just revealed a secret. It had ignited a firestorm, forcing the world to confront the moral compromises inherent in the glittering world of global sports. The zombie in Paris, once a haunting enigma, now had a voice, and his story was a brutal indictment of unchecked corporate power. The long-term impact on Ronaldo's career and personal life was undeniable, a shadow that stretched across his most triumphant moments and lingered in his quiet reflections. The convulsion, the subsequent decision to play, and the decades of silence had carved deep grooves into his psyche. Physically, he recovered, returning to the pitch with a ferocity that defied his medical ordeal. He would go on to achieve immense success, winning another World Cup in 2002, silencing many critics with his extraordinary talent. Yet, the memory of Paris 1998, of feeling like a pawn in a much larger, darker game, never truly faded. His journey of recovery wasn't just physical. It was a profound psychological battle to reclaim his narrative, to understand how his body had been manipulated and his well-being jeopardized for corporate gain. The public acknowledgement of the truth by authorities, however reluctant and long overdue, brought a measure of validation, a confirmation that his lived experience was not a delusion, but a horrifying reality. The Brazilian Football Confederation, under immense public pressure following Dr. Almeida's confession and the subsequent media storm, issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging lapses in judgment and undue external influences without ever directly naming Nike. It was a hollow victory, a bureaucratic apology devoid of true remorse. Yet, it was a crack in the wall of silence that had stood for so long. The legacy of the 1998 World Cup final became forever tainted by the incident. What should have been remembered solely for France's historic victory and Brazil's valiant effort was now inextricably linked to the Ronaldo mystery. It became a cautionary tale, whispered in locker rooms and debated in sports forums, a stark reminder of the potential for corruption at the highest echelons of professional sport. The lessons learned, or perhaps not truly learned, by the sports world continued to manifest in subsequent controversies. The relentless pursuit of profit, the commercialization of athletes, and the blurred lines between sportsmanship and corporate branding remained pressing issues. The debate about athlete welfare versus commercial interests intensified, fueled not just by Ronaldo's story, but by numerous others that have since come to light, highlighting the systemic pressures faced by sports stars globally. Ronaldo's eventual redemption, therefore, was not found in a single game or trophy, but in his resilience, his ability to overcome adversity, and his unwavering passion for the game despite the betrayals he endured. His triumphs in later years, particularly his phenomenal performance in the 2002 World Cup, where he emerged as the tournament's top scorer and led Brazil to victory, served as a powerful testament to his indomitable spirit. It was a redemption earned through sweat, tears, and an unyielding will to prove that the phenomenon could not be extinguished by corporate machinations. He spoke of his struggles, not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength, advocating for greater protections for athletes and transparency within the sports industry. The final reflection on corporate power, betrayal, and the human spirit revealed a complex tapestry of ambition, greed, and resilience. The story of Ronaldo in 1998 was more than just a football anecdote. It was a microcosm of a larger societal struggle, where immense financial interests often clash with human dignity and ethical considerations. The revelation of Nike's alleged role, while never fully prosecuted in a court of law, served as a potent symbol of how unchecked corporate influence could warp sporting integrity. The betrayal felt by Ronaldo, by his teammates, and by a nation that idolized him left an indelible scar. Yet, through it all, the human spirit, embodied by Ronaldo's subsequent achievements and Dr. Almeida's eventual courage, found a way to assert itself, demanding truth and, ultimately, a measure of justice. The enduring mystery, though largely solved, left behind a lingering sense of unease. The cost of silence, paid by Ronaldo in personal anguish and by the sport in diminished trust, was immeasurable. The zombie in Paris, once a haunting enigma, now stood as a powerful, poignant symbol, not of a player who failed, but of a man who was failed, exploited by the very system designed to celebrate his talent. His distant eyes on that fateful day at the Stade de France, a gaze that had perplexed millions, now held a clearer, more tragic meaning. They reflected not just physical fatigue or emotional stress, but the profound weight of a secret, a betrayal orchestrated by those who saw him not as a human being, but as a commodity. The image of Ronaldo, a shadow of himself wandering the pitch, became a stark reminder of the darker side of sport, a side where profit could, and often did, outweigh principle, forever etching the 1998 World Cup final into history not just for its sporting